The champagne glass in Talia Marsh's hand had gone warm 20 minutes ago, and she was still holding it like a prop because it gave her hands something to do besides curl into fists. The ballroom at the top of the Ashcombe Tower glittered with a kind of money that did not need to announce itself. Chandeliers throwing gold light over 300 guests in silk and tailored wool, and Talia stood near the edge of it in a purple dress she had bought on sale, watching her older sister Priya hold court near the string quartet like she owned the building instead of just married the man who did. Priya's laugh carried across the room, bright and practiced, and when her eyes found Talia standing alone near the terrace doors, that laugh sharpened into something with teeth. She crossed the floor with two of her friends trailing behind her like a matched set of accessories, and she did not lower her voice when she reached her sister, because Priya had never once lowered her voice for anyone's comfort but her own. "Nobody wants you," she said, loud enough that the nearest cluster of guests turned to look. "That's why you're standing over here by yourself at 22 with nothing to show for it." One of the friends laughed behind a raised hand. Talia felt the heat crawl up her neck, felt every eye in that section of the ballroom land on her at once, and she opened her mouth to say something, anything, when a man crossed the entire length of the ballroom floor in a straight, unhurried line, and the room seemed to bend around him as he moved. He wore black, a suit so dark it swallowed the chandelier light instead of reflecting it, and beneath the jacket his shirt was black too, buttoned to the throat with no tie, which on any other man in that room would have looked like a mistake, and on him looked like a decision. Talia noticed his hands first because he checked a slim watch on his wrist as he walked, unbothered, the way a man checks the time when he has already decided how the next 5 minutes will go. He was tall, dark-haired, with a jaw that looked carved rather than grown, and when he reached Talia and Priya and the two friends who had gone suddenly, uncomfortably silent, he did not look at Priya at all. He looked at Talia, and he said her name, which was strange, because Talia had never met him in her life and had no idea how he knew it. "Miss Marsh," he said, and something about the way he said it, unhurried, deliberate, made the two syllables sound like they belonged only to him now. He extended a hand, not toward Priya, not toward the friends still frozen mid-laugh, but toward Talia, and he told the small gathered crowd, in a voice pitched just loud enough to carry, that he had been looking for her all evening and apologized for arriving late to claim his dance. Talia did not know what was happening. She knew only that Priya's face had gone the color of old paper and that the man's hand was still extended, warm and steady, waiting. Priya's husband, Desmond, watched the whole exchange from across the room with a champagne flute in his hand and did nothing, the way he always did nothing, and Talia had long since stopped expecting otherwise from a man who had built his entire marriage around agreeing with whatever Priya said loudest. The two friends flanking her sister, women Talia recognized vaguely from a country club she had never once set foot inside, exchanged a look that told her exactly how this story would be repeated tomorrow over brunch, embroidered and sharpened with each telling. Talia had spent years absorbing these moments quietly, telling herself that dignity meant not giving her sister the satisfaction of a reaction, but tonight the humiliation sat differently in her chest, heavier, harder to swallow down with a sip of warm champagne. She was still working out what to say, some careful sentence that would not give Priya anything more to use, when the room's attention shifted so completely and so suddenly that she felt it before she understood why. She was a curator at a small but respected gallery 2 blocks from the tower, the kind of job that paid enough to keep her proud and not enough to keep her comfortable, and she had come to the gala tonight because the gallery's biggest donor had insisted, not because she had any interest in standing in a room full of people who measured worth in real estate. She took the stranger's hand because the alternative was standing there while her sister's laughter filled the silence again, and the moment her palm met his, she understood two things at once. The first was that his grip was gentle in a way that felt deliberate, like a man being careful with something he suspected might break, though nothing in his face suggested he believed that of her. The second was that every single person still watching them had gone quiet, because whoever this man was, his presence had rearranged the entire room's attention around him, and now, by extension, around her. He led her toward the dance floor without waiting for her answer, and only once they were moving, once her hand rested against the black wool of his shoulder and the string quartet had shifted into something slow, did he introduce himself. His name was Jae-ho-sun, and he told her plainly, without lowering his voice as though it were a secret, that he ran an import business that operated out of the Koreatown district and 3 other cities besides, though the way he said business made it clear he meant something the guests around them would never say aloud in a ballroom. Talia had heard the name before, whispered in places it was not meant to be repeated, attached to warnings rather than introductions. She had heard men in expensive suits at other functions lower their voices when a certain family was mentioned, had heard the word dangerous used the way people used it about whether they hoped would pass them by. She looked up at him now, close enough to see that his eyes were a deep brown that did not soften even when the corner of his mouth did, and she asked him, plainly, why a man like him had crossed an entire ballroom to rescue a woman he had never met from a sister's cruelty. Jae-ho did not answer right away. He turned her slowly under the chandelier light, his hand steady at her waist, and when he finally spoke, his voice had dropped low enough that only she could hear it. He told her that he had watched her stand alone near that terrace door for the better part of 20 minutes while 300 people pretended not to notice her isolation, and that cruelty performed for an audience was the one thing in this world he had never learned to tolerate quietly. Talia did not know what to say to that. She was still turning it over in her mind when she felt his hand tighten, almost imperceptibly, at her waist, and she followed his gaze to the terrace doors, where a man in a gray suit had just stepped inside from the balcony and was scanning the crowd with the particular focus of someone looking for one person in particular. Jae-ho's whole body had changed. Talia felt it under her hand, the shift from stillness to something coiled, and his voice when he spoke again was flat and quiet in a way that made the hair rise on her arms. He told her, without breaking the rhythm of the dance, that the man at the terrace door worked for a rival organization out of the Eastern District, a man named Deacon Voss who had spent the better part of a year trying to find an opening into territory that belonged to Jae-ho's family, and that his presence at a private gala meant either an extraordinary miscalculation or a deliberate provocation. Talia's heart had begun to hammer, though she kept her face still, some instinct telling her that panic would draw more attention than composure. She asked him what he intended to do, and Jae-ho told her, without any change in his expression, that he intended to finish the dance, because stopping now would tell every person watching that something had rattled him, and he did not give anyone that satisfaction, not even men sent to provoke him. But therefore, he added, his eyes flicking briefly toward 2 men near the bar who Talia now realized had been standing unnaturally still all evening, she needed to trust him for the next several minutes and do exactly as he said, because the man at the terrace door was not the danger. The danger was whoever Voss had brought with him that nobody had spotted yet. The confrontation happened faster than Talia had time to be afraid of it. Voss crossed the room with the deliberate ease of a man who wanted to be seen doing it, and when he reached them he offered a smile that did not touch his eyes and asked Jae-ho, loudly enough for the surrounding guests to hear, whether he had started bringing dates to gatherings that had nothing to do with him. Jae-ho did not raise his voice. He told Voss, evenly, that the gathering had everything to do with him, given that his family had underwritten half the charitable fund the gala was raising money for, and that Voss's own invitation had likely been an oversight someone would be answering for by morning. The exchange lasted less than a minute, polite on the surface and vicious underneath, and Talia watched Jae-ho's 2 men near the bar drift closer without ever seeming to move with purpose, and she understood that this entire ballroom, gilded and glittering, was a chessboard she had wandered into without knowing the rules. Voss left first, his smile never faltering, but as he turned to go his eyes found Talia directly and lingered there a beat too long, and something in that look settled into her stomach like a stone. She did not know yet that she had just become visible to the one man in the city she most needed to remain invisible to. But the night was not finished delivering complications. As the gala wound toward its close and guests began drifting toward the elevators, a member of the catering staff Talia did not recognize approached her near the coat check and pressed a folded note into her hand before disappearing into the kitchen corridor, and when she unfolded it in the elevator down, her name was written on it in a hand she did not know, followed by a single line that made her blood run cold. You should have stayed by the terrace doors alone. Jae-ho, standing beside her in the elevator, took the note from her trembling fingers and read it without any visible reaction, though Talia felt the temperature of the small space change around him. He told her, quietly, that she was not going home alone tonight, and when she started to argue, told her plainly that this was no longer a matter of preference, but of the practical reality that Voss's organization now knew her face and, more dangerously, knew that Jae-ho cared what happened to it. Talia felt something twist in her chest at the word cared, spoken so plainly by a man she had known for less than 2 hours, and she realized, with a small shock, that some part of her did not want to argue as hard as she should have. Before they left the ballroom, Jae-ho guided her toward a side corridor away from the main exit, one hand light at the small of her back, and told her quietly that the front elevators were being watched and that they would take a service route instead. The corridor was narrow, lit by a single dim fixture, and when the sound of voices drifted around the corner ahead of them, voices Jae-ho clearly did not want finding her. He stepped in close, pressing her gently back against the wall between a fire door and a stack of folded linen carts, his body angled to block her from view. Talia felt the warmth of him even through the wool of his jacket, felt her own breath go shallow in a way that had nothing to do with fear anymore, and when the voices passed without slowing, Jae-ho did not step back right away. He looked down at her in the near dark, close enough that she could smell cedar and something like smoke beneath his cologne, and for 3 full seconds neither of them moved or spoke, the silence between them saying considerably more than either was prepared to admit aloud. Then he stepped back, offered his hand again as if nothing had happened, and led her the rest of the way to the car waiting below, though Talia noticed her own pulse did not settle for several minutes afterward. She stayed that first night in a guest suite of his penthouse 3 floors above his private offices, a space so quiet and so carefully controlled that she found herself unable to sleep, listening instead to the low murmur of voices in the hallway as men she had never met moved through the apartment on some rotation she did not understand. In the morning she found Jae-ho at the kitchen counter with black coffee and a folder of documents. He closed the moment she entered, and she asked him, directly, what exactly she had walked into by taking his hand on that dance floor. He set down his cup and studied her for a long moment before answering, and when he did, his voice carried none of the polish it had held in the ballroom. He told her about his older cousin Insu, a woman who had run logistics for the family's legitimate businesses for years and who had been killed 18 months earlier in a car explosion meant, everyone believed, for Jae-ho himself, a mistake in timing that had cost the one person in his organization who had never once looked at him like he was only useful for what he could command. He told Talia that since that day he had built walls around himself so thorough that his own men joked he had forgotten how to want anything beyond the next territorial dispute, and that watching her stand alone in that ballroom, unbothered by her sister's cruelty until the exact moment it turned public, had cracked something in him he had thought permanently sealed. Talia listened to all of it without interrupting, and when he finished she told him, honestly, that she did not know what to do with a confession like that from a man who had known her less than a day, and Jae-ho told her he did not expect her to know yet. He only wanted her to understand what she had walked into, so that whatever she chose next, she chose it with clear eyes. Over the following days, Talia found herself unable to return fully to her ordinary life. The gallery still needed her, and she went in most mornings with one of Jae-ho's men, a quiet, watchful driver named Marcus. Waiting outside in a black car that drew looks from her co-workers, she pretended not to notice. Priya called twice, her voice tight with a curiosity she was too proud to voice directly, fishing for details about the man who had humiliated her in front of half the city's wealthiest families without ever raising his voice, and Talia found she had very little patience left for her sister's games, a change that surprised her more than it should have. In the evenings she returned to the penthouse, and slowly, without either of them naming it, a rhythm developed between her and Jae-ho that had nothing to do with danger, and everything to do with 2 guarded people learning how to occupy the same space. He asked her about the paintings she loved and listened when she answered instead of waiting for his turn to speak. She asked him about the tattoo along his forearm, ink she had noticed the second night when he rolled his sleeves back while reviewing documents at the kitchen table, and he told her it marked the year he had taken control of the organization from his father, a year he did not enjoy remembering but refused to pretend had not happened. She found herself watching his hands more than she meant to, the precision in the way he moved through a room, the stillness he carried even when the men around him were tense enough to spark, and she caught him watching her back more than once, though neither of them said anything about it. On the fourth evening, with no immediate threat pressing on either of them, Jae-ho found Talia in the penthouse's small library, a room she had not known existed until she went looking for something quiet to read, and instead of leaving her to it, he sat across from her with a book of his own that he did not open. He asked her, after a long stretch of comfortable silence, why she had chosen art instead of something with steadier money in it, and Talia told him about her grandmother, who had cleaned office buildings for 30 years and had taken Talia to a museum exactly once when she was young, and had stood in front of a single painting for 20 minutes without saying a word, and how that silence had taught Talia more about beauty and patience than anything she had learned since. Jae-ho listened the way he listened to everything, fully, without reaching for his phone or glancing at the door, and when she finished he told her that his own mother had died when he was young enough that he barely remembered her voice, only the sound of her humming while she cooked, and that he had spent years afraid that running the family the way his father demanded would erase whatever softness she had left in him. Talia asked him if it had, and Jae-ho was quiet for a long moment before admitting that he had believed so, until a woman in a purple dress had refused to shrink herself in front of 300 strangers, and something in him had recognized that refusal as a kind of courage he had forgotten how to practice. Neither of them moved to close the distance between their chairs that night, but something had settled differently in the room by the time Talia finally went to bed, a quiet she carried with her instead of the wariness she had walked in with. The moment that changed the shape of everything happened on the sixth night, when a call came through just after midnight that pulled Jae-ho out of the apartment fast enough that he did not stop to explain, only told Marcus to keep the doors locked, and told Talia, briefly, that he would be back before morning. He was not back before morning. He returned instead just after 4 with blood on his knuckles and a look on his face that told Talia not to ask questions in front of his men, and she did not until they were alone in the kitchen, and he had poured himself a drink he did not touch. He told her that Voss's people had hit one of his warehouses near the port, that 2 of his men had not walked away from it, and that the message left behind, scrawled where his people would be certain to find it, had named her directly, a warning that the next target would not be property. Talia felt the floor tilt under her, not from fear exactly, but from the sudden, undeniable knowledge that she was no longer a bystander in this war. She was a target in it, and the realization sat in her chest heavy and strange, because underneath the fear was something else she had not expected to feel, a fierce, unwelcome refusal to be the reason Jae-ho lost anyone else the way he had lost his cousin. Jae-ho did not sleep that night, and Talia found him just before dawn standing at the tall windows of the living room, still in the same shirt with a dark stain at the cuff he had not bothered to change out of, staring down at the city, like it owed him an answer it was refusing to give. She did not say anything at first, only stood beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and after a long while he told her, in a voice stripped down to something raw, that the 2 men he had lost at the warehouse had families, adult sons and a wife who would be told this morning that neither of them was coming home, and that every single time this happened he told himself it would be the last, and every single time he was wrong. Talia did not offer him easy comfort, because she sensed, correctly, that he would see through it immediately. Instead she asked him what the men had been like, and Jae-ho, surprised by the question, found himself telling her small things. That one of them had taught himself to cook because he missed his mother's food and never trusted restaurants to get it right, that the other had a laugh so loud it used to embarrass everyone in the room until they laughed along with him anyway. By the time the sun came up over the skyline, something in his shoulders had eased slightly, not healed, but no longer carrying the weight entirely alone, and he told her, quietly, that he had not spoken about his men that way to anyone in years, not even the ones who had known them longest. Priya called again the next morning, and this time Talia answered, mostly out of habit, and immediately regretted it. Her sister's voice had lost its usual polish, replaced with something sharper, almost nervous, as she asked pointed questions about who exactly Jae-ho's son was and whether Talia understood what kind of man she had let carry her off the dance floor. Talia felt the old instinct rise in her, the urge to shrink and apologize and make herself smaller so Priya would feel comfortable again, and then she felt it die, quietly, somewhere behind her ribs. She told her sister, evenly, that she understood exactly what kind of man he was, better than Priya ever would, because Priya had spent her whole life dating men for the size of their bank accounts and had never once asked what any of them would do for her when it cost them something. The line went silent for a long moment, and when Priya spoke again her voice had lost its sharpness entirely, replaced by something smaller that almost sounded like the sister Talia remembered from childhood, before money and marriage had hardened her into someone else. Priya asked, quietly, if Talia was safe, and Talia found she did not have a simple answer for that, only the truth, which was that she was frightened and certain at the same time, in a way she had never been about anything before. That was the night she made the choice that she could not take back. She told Jaeho, standing in the low light of that kitchen, that she was not going to hide in a guest room while other people decided her fate around her, that she wanted to understand exactly what resources Voss had, exactly what leverage existed that might end this before anyone else got hurt, and that she intended to help him find it, whatever that meant. Jaeho told her plainly that this was not her fight, that she had a life outside this world worth protecting, and Talia told him, just as plainly, that the fight had already chosen her the moment Voss's man pressed that note into her hand at the coat check, and pretending otherwise would only get her killed by surprise instead of by choice. Something shifted in his face when she said that, something that looked almost like the beginning of respect layered over the fear he was clearly fighting not to show. He did not argue further. Instead, he set his untouched drink down, crossed the small distance of the kitchen between them, and told her, in a voice stripped of every ounce of the control he wore like armor everywhere else, that he had spent 18 months convincing himself that caring about another person again was a weakness he could not afford, and that she had undone that conviction in less than a week without even trying to. Talia did not move away. She told him she had spent her whole life being told she was not enough for anyone to fight for, that her own sister had said as much in front of 300 strangers, and that whatever this was between them, dangerous or reckless or impossible, she did not want to walk away from it now that she had felt what it was like to have someone cross a room for her. When he kissed her, it was not gentle, and it was not careful, and neither of them pretended afterward that either of them could uncross that line. The final confrontation came 4 days later, when Talia used her position at the gallery to arrange a private showing that she knew, through a contact she had cultivated during her research into Voss's known associates, would draw one of his lieutenants out of hiding under the pretense of an art acquisition for a client who did not exist. She had built the entire ruse herself over 3 sleepless nights. Cross-referencing shipping manifests, she had convinced Marcus to help her access with public auction records, until she found the exact thread connecting Voss's legitimate front business to a warehouse 2 blocks from the gallery, the same warehouse, she was certain, where the attack on Jaeho's men had been planned. She told Jaeho her plan only once it was fully built, refusing to let him talk her out of the parts that put her in the room, and though his jaw tightened at every mention of her presence in the building, he did not forbid it, because by then he understood that forbidding Talia anything had never once worked, and was not going to start now. The showing went exactly as she had designed it at first, the gallery lit low and warm, the smell of fresh paint and old canvas thick in the back room where Talia led the lieutenant, a heavy-set man named Brennan, who kept glancing at his watch like a man who did not trust the quiet. She kept her voice light and unhurried, walking him through invented provenance details for a piece that did not exist, her hands steady on the frame even as her heartbeat hammered hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. Halfway through, Brennan's phone buzzed once, twice, and his expression shifted from bored to alert in the space of a breath, and Talia understood, with a cold drop in her stomach, that someone had reached him faster than her plan accounted for. She did the only thing she could think to do, knocking a small marble bookend from a nearby shelf so it shattered loudly against the floor, and in the half-second Brennan's attention snapped toward the noise, she stepped between him and the door, apologizing profusely, clumsily, buying just enough time for the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside to become Jaeho's men rather than Brennan's own. It was Talia, not Jaeho, who kept the lieutenant talking and off balance long enough for Jaeho's men to quietly secure the warehouse 2 blocks away and recover documents that tied Voss directly to the port attack, evidence solid enough to bring the full weight of both the organization's allies and, more dangerously for Voss, several law enforcement contacts Jaeho's family had cultivated over decades for exactly this kind of leverage. When Voss himself arrived at the gallery 20 minutes later, alerted that something had gone wrong, he found Jaeho waiting for him in the main room among the paintings, calm and unhurried in a way that made the danger in it unmistakable, and Talia, standing beside a sculpture near the door rather than hidden away as Voss clearly expected, watching him with a steadiness that made his confident stride falter for the first time since she had seen him. Voss threatened them both, loudly, promising consequences neither of them would survive, but Jaeho only told him, quietly, that the documents recovered from his warehouse were already in the hands of people who would end his operation legally, which was, Jaeho added, a far crueler fate for a man like Voss than anything Jaeho himself might have chosen. Voss left the gallery that night surrounded by men who no longer looked entirely certain of their loyalty, and within 2 weeks his organization had collapsed under the weight of federal attention that Jaeho's contacts made sure landed precisely where it needed to. 3 weeks after that, on a quiet evening with no threat hanging over either of them for the first time since the gala, Jaeho found Talia on the balcony of his penthouse looking out over the same skyline that had glittered behind her at that first dance, and he told her, without any of the polish he had once used like a shield, that his cousin Insu would have liked her, that Insu had spent years telling him he worked too hard at being untouchable and would end up alone because of it, and that Talia had proven Insu right in the best possible way. Talia turned to face him, the city lights behind her, and told him that she was not interested in being a chapter he closed the book on once the danger passed, that she wanted to know what came after the war ended, whether he had ever let himself imagine an ordinary version of a life with someone in it. Jaeho did not answer with words right away. He reached for her hand, the same gentle, deliberate grip from that first dance, and pulled her against him, and for the first time since Talia had known him, the stillness in his body was not the coiled readiness of a man waiting for a threat. It was simply the quiet of a man who had finally stopped waiting to lose someone. The gallery reopened the following week without incident, and Talia found herself back behind her small desk most mornings, though Marcus still waited outside in the black car more often than not, a habit neither of them had discussed ending. Priya sent a card, awkward and stiff in its wording, inviting Talia to a small dinner rather than the sprawling parties she usually favored, and Talia accepted, curious to see what remained of her sister once the audience was gone. Jaeho did not come to that dinner, respecting when Talia told him this particular evening needed to belong to her alone, but he was waiting on the balcony when she returned, 2 glasses of wine already poured, and he listened while she told him that Priya had apologized, clumsily and imperfectly, and that it had been enough, for now, to let something old and painful begin to soften. He told her, in turn, that he had visited his cousin Insu's grave that afternoon for the first time in months, and had found himself, for once, without the old weight of guilt pressing down while he stood there, only a quiet gratitude he had not expected to feel again. Talia took his hand across the small table between them, and neither of them spoke for a long while, content simply to sit in the kind of silence that no longer needed filling, the city humming quietly below them, alive and indifferent and, for tonight at least, no longer a threat to either one of them. Somewhere below, the ballroom lights of another gala flickered on for another crowd of strangers who would never know how close disaster had come to this particular corner of the city, and Talia found she did not miss standing among them, not even a little. She had spent 22 years believing that being chosen meant being small enough not to threaten anyone's comfort, and it had taken a man crossing an entire ballroom floor without hesitation to teach her otherwise. She was not smaller now. If anything, she had grown into a version of herself she had not known was waiting underneath the one her sister had always been so quick to dismiss, and sitting there with Jaeho's hand still warm around hers, she understood that whatever came next, war or peace, or the long ordinary stretch of days in between, she would meet it exactly as she had met that first note at the coat check, with her eyes open and her feet planted, unwilling to be anyone's afterthought ever again.